Welcome to the Worlds of Possibility podcast. I'm your host, Dave Kopp, CEO of Worlds, where we're creating the AI platform that's bringing AI-based automation into the physical operations of the world's largest companies. In this podcast, we're taking an exciting journey into the minds of exponential leaders who are not just leading, but defining and transforming the world's greatest companies. We'll be exploring what makes them who they are, what drives them to push the boundary of what's possible, and what sparks their insatiable desire for greatness. Through some very deep and I hope meaningful conversations, we'll unlock the secrets behind their leadership prowess and see what's empowering them to consistently redefine the status quo. So buckle up and join us for an enlightening exploration into new worlds of possibility through the minds of some of our greatest leaders.
Decision making is that's what humans do. That's our product. Right. We make these decisions, we move on. But and with information overload, we fail to recognize that not making a decision is the same as making a decision.
It's a decision.
It's a decision in itself.
Sure.
And it's very hard for people to, the promise of the analytics movement was that we would make perfect decisions. They would be infallible, right, and they'd never kill our careers. And, we'd always be able to make a perfect decision because we have perfect information. But we already know that there's always more information. You can cut a cohort down a little bit more. You can find a new trend or whatever. And I think that the art of decision making these days is to go back to that classic explore exploit dilemma, and to understand that that is the inherently the tension in every single decision. Have I got time to use new information? Yes, go explore. Or do I need to exploit what I have now? And conceptually, that is so important. Now, we flip that around a lot to help people. In practical terms, what we've found is the most helpful to people is consider, and this is where it comes back to AI, consider the era that you're prepared to live with. And AI has eras, right? So which era, we use this with human-centered AI design, list all the things that could possibly go wrong. What are all the errors that happen? In old school AI, it was you could track all the false positives and false negatives. You could make a decision about which of those you're prepared to live with. The false positive, false negative rate. You can actually measure those. You can put fairness tests around them. That was so tidy compared to generative AI, where you actually don't really quite know the error that you might end up making. You could make an error of the lack of diversity. There's good research coming out that everyone using the same GPT reduces the overall creativity. Would you rather have that error, or would you rather manage such a diverse group of humans because that's hard, right? It's hard to do that. So we're doing this live every time we run a course or a workshop. This is the one place that we're constantly rethinking the content. It's how do we help people conceptualize the best way and turn it into practical use, the best way to use these tools on an everyday basis for them without hardwiring and over-relying on the tools. You can over-trust, you can stop your own learning, you can fail to pick up an obvious error. Overconfidence is constantly there. These are new flavors of the old automation bias, where we look at the output of a machine and go, ooh, that's better. We were talking about that last night, the people that took their GPSs to their deaths. That's happening in these tools in ways that aren't visible, especially in the data analysis side and in the coding side as well, where there's a lot of hype about how good these tools are for coding and how good they are for data analysis. But the reality is that people are spending way more time fixing errors from the tools than they're admitting to.
Something you said there that I love, that I'm going to take away today from this, right, and start spreading out, because you hit on something when you said decision-making process, and you kind of pointed out these things that we've been doing for a long time. It's kind of like pointing back to the classics and foundational things that don't change. It doesn't matter how much information we create, basic decision-making processes is not going to change in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We understand it at this base level well enough so that it's when you're feeling overwhelmed, go back to the basics, right? Go back to the things we know and learn.
Well, and it's going to be humans who are making the decisions, right? Sure, there's some level of delegation, especially as these tools become more agentic, that you'll do, but the reality is, at the end, there's somebody who's responsible for the action that's taken. We all know that there's going to be a human responsible at every level of the organization, whatever kind of organization it is. So we're making a decision, right? We're getting input from something. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we understand how well it's working. Sometimes we don't really understand how it's working. But in the end, that's our judgment that we have to make in terms of, say, that's a decision I'm going to make. Yep, I'm putting my career or my education or whatever it is on the line. I'm going to go down this path. That's my decision. So,
would you guys y'all engage with folks though on the other, like when you start to get to robotics and things like, I mean, agency in itself is its own deeper topic if we think of it from a software perspective, but robots are pretty easy to sort of put from that's an agent, right? It's my self-driving car. And I mean, there's already been cases of like, it's kind of an ethical, like when we start talking about the ethics of AI and alignment, those are,
it's a whole nother topic.
Right. You are kind of at that point, I am turning over responsibility. Mm-hmm. So who bears the burden of, of the outcome is it the machine or is it the designer or is it do you guys have to get faced with that with customers in terms of like?
That's a tricky, that's a gnarly one.
Yeah.
I mean, it is on one level, you think about it as like Tristan Harris's, digital voodoo dolls have now become digital voodoo agents, so who owns that agentic image of you? How many do you have? Right. Say in the digital partner space, corporates, the most advanced corporates are thinking about every single individual having a digital partner, and that the digital partner is the one, because humans are hard to manage, right? They do things they're not supposed to do. They share passwords, for example.
Variability.
Really, they share passwords, or they ask people for access to data that they actually shouldn't have access to, but someone says, yeah, I'll send you the spreadsheet, whatever it is. Yeah. But the digital agents, not so much. They sit inside the digital ecosystem, and they talk to other digital employees in a much more, first of all, you can monitor the whole thing. You're not surveilling a human, you're surveilling a digital agent. You can see how they talk to each other, and you can manage the security levels that they have access to. And there are companies that that is literally what they're thinking about, is how they're and thinking about, well, what happens when you leave the company? Can you take your digital?
Is it transferable?
Yeah.
That's something I've put a lot of thought towards in the past. I hope the evolution of AI is more decentralized, so we don't have the centralization that we have now with the big five or whatever you want to call them. You'd love to see a world where maybe there's even a base model, a world's base model for AI, but then each culture can build on top of that base model. I do think about what you just said a lot. It's like, will we have the ability to create our own AI that's mine? It has my individuality. I was touched by what you said about your daughter, and I kept thinking, well, how do we capture that now before she gets averaged out through LLMs? Sure. How do we capture that now and use that to train her AI so that her AI is her? Is that a possible future? Do you guys talk about that at all when your clients are?
Yeah,
we had one client that's thinking about how do they have customers that they don't interact with much. It's sort of an exception case. You only talk to them when something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And so their vision is to only have to all the customers have AIs. So then there's no customer company interaction. It's just the agents talking. Now that's quite a mind shift to think about how you only have AIs talking to AIs. You don't bother humans with this stuff.
I wouldn't be surprised if the web, the internet, becomes more executable. Like, we're not going to visit web pages anymore. It does morph to be more for our agents. My agent goes.
It's just an API ecosystem.
Yes, sure. It goes out and buys me clothes. It sets up my appointments. Things like that. And then so the web becomes more executable, as opposed to us visiting web pages and clicking on links. I wouldn't be surprised to see that as a future.
Sure. You see, we actually were commenting on that same idea this past week. There was some research that came out where people were analyzing what ChatGPT could do with images of applications, right? So could it actually identify a button and click on it and so forth? Yeah. And it was kind of an interesting research exercise of what it can do. Of course, that's not at all what ChatGPT is designed for. So it's sort of a misapplication, but it's a good academic, research process. The problem with it all is that, like, I like the headline of it was, look, it can go out and buy things for you at 75% accuracy rate. I'm like, okay, well, what happened to the other 25%? Did it like buy the wrong thing or not buy it at all? But if you look at other research,
shoes
though,
and I got undies.
yeah, there was, but on the more productive and useful side, there's actually research that Apple put out recently where they did some work with CMU, and what they designed an AI to evaluate apps. Makes a lot of sense. Apple spends tons of money, I don't know what it is, to evaluate apps. Every app that goes to the App Store. So why not create an AI that can actually test the app? Knows exactly how it works, whether it's working or not, does it to taking the actions it's doing or not. That same technology, you could see how that could be expanded. And I could ask Siri to go, buy some shoes and undies, right? Or whatever it is. Like, that's definitely a possible. And so as you see, like, that's one of the things we actually really like doing, is looking at where that sort of cutting edge research is, and sort of say, well, how could that be used? So I think your idea is totally possible. Do we want that? Don't know, but that's the reason it would happen.
Yeah.
Is that we go, I don't really feel like, going to websites as much anymore. I just want to tell my agent to go do a thing for me. And if that's actually something that turns out to be useful and people like it, it's totally possible.
My wife would never do it, but I would do it all the time. I hate going to stores.
There you go. It could be very individual. Right?
That's right. No, exactly.
Yeah. And even when you're talking about agents, right? We're talking about this continues to hit on, and I'm happy the word decision came up, because now we're talking about agents making decisions again. Sure. We keep talking about giving over the decision-making process, but back to helping companies or people, whoever, navigate. And one of the things that we've sort of talked about offline, but I'd like to dive deeper into it because we've sort of saved it for this, right? Is when things are changing so fast and you have to lean on existing decision-making processes, and we're kind of always looking for what hasn't changed, but what's going forward. When things are moving so fast that it potentially is moving so quick that we don't really have a decision-making framework that is dealt with, what if I make a decision and it's literally everything that I based it on is irrelevant in 6, 12, 9 months, right? Because when things moved slower, you could say my decision-making framework is universal, but now are we going to reach points where we're like, you're going to have, it's the uncertainty thing you talked about, right? We want certainty, but we have to deal with probability. So what sort of advice do you have on like adjusting the decision-making framework for everything you're about to do may get thrown away?
Yeah, well, we like to say that the AI we're using today is the worst AI we'll ever use. That's right? Because it's changing so rapidly, and that's seemingly changing every day or every week. Yeah. Every time we stand up to give a keynote, we have to sort of stop and go, wait, what happened yesterday? Yeah. Like, right, yeah. Do we have that in the slide?
Do I need to change the slide?
Like, yeah. So it's a constant process. I think one of the things that is important to remember is that this change is happening so much faster because it is so much more accessible.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. So rewind back to the beginning of the internet, and we'll call in 1995 as the dawn of the commercial internet, right? That's when Netscape went public and so forth. And at the time, there were only 9 million people on the internet. Mm-hmm. There weren't a lot of people who were experiencing the change and that really early phase when we were going from the only way to make a website was using BBEdit and actually having your HTML. And then I was at Macromedia at the time and we launched Dreamweaver, which allowed for GUI stuff. And actually the first launch I had was when we put out Shockwave, and it was the first multimedia player on the internet. Prior to that, everything was only text and images, and real networks would compete on which one was, did what more first, faster. But there weren't that many people observing these early changes. Mm-hmm. There weren't that many people who were sucked into the whole novelty factor, right? When we launched Shockwave, the first thing we did is we convinced MTV to put a Harley Davidson that was just shook and rumbled on its homepage. And it was so exciting that it literally crashed their website. And it was one of the bigger websites around at that time, but the novelty factor was really incredible. It didn't really matter to MTV's, long-term, that it crashed. Today, though, within a few months, we have 100 million people, more than an order of magnitude number of people using these tools than was using the internet then, and it's growing faster. So you have this problem that the change is in front of everyone.
We have the compute automatically as well.
Yeah. And so it means that these sort of questions about what's useful, what's novel, how are we going to get there? What do we do about all of this? What kind of change management do we have in place? It's suddenly everywhere all at once. And I think that's one of the things to remember with this sort of anxiety, is it's everywhere all at once. We think that it's going to have an impact across everyone, potentially. And so suddenly everyone all at once is worried about everything. And it's just this huge moment of tension that is very difficult to sort of manage at an organization level.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like your clients would be persistent, because change management is not like a transaction. Like, I'm going to come in and fix your change management.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's change every day.
Every day.
And the challenges follow those changes. And so it's like, are your clients kind of clients for life kind of thing? Do they just want you here all the time regularly? Or?
Ask us again in a few years.
Okay.
No, but I think the premise is definitely that, right? Yeah. I mean, there's a couple things when thinking about educating your people. One is this is not about how to use certain features, right? This is not like, well, we have to get everybody up to speed on Excel and have everybody learn how to run a pivot table. I mean, the actual, the actual tools themselves are pretty straightforward, right? We've been using prompts for a long time. Right. That's what a search prompt is, right? So that's not the hard part. So that's the number one thing is that it's a different mindset for learning and development, right? That this is about thinking about what it means to work with a different kind of intelligence. And, you could maybe find some analogies and things like, well, we're entering a new market. We don't really understand how people in the healthcare space works, or we're moving into a geography and, haven't, worked with that certain culture. And, those are kind of the closest, but this is actually really another step change function. But yes, there is the best clients who are really thinking about this understand that this is a continuous learning journey. This isn't something you learn once and it's fine, because every time we sit down with people, we say, this is all going to change next week. We don't know what's going to change, but so far the pattern is this stuff's changing all the time. So we get into a regular rhythm of coming back, and it's, we got a monthly cadence of understanding exactly what's changed. How do you think about it differently? What's new in the industry? What's new in the research? What's new in the usability? How do you bring new ideas to people to have them think about it? And how do you especially build a community of practice? Because no matter how much we spend in these tools, we're not going to anticipate exactly how the person in that particular role at that particular company might find use in these tools. And those people, you need to expose their learnings to their community to be able to share ideas. Right?
I would think that your engagements are on multiple levels too, because you spoke earlier, Helen, about you speak to an executive group. It's more about the strategy of how we use these technologies. But then there's also what do you do, which is down when rubber meets the road. Do you have to start with the strategy first, or do you go right to helping people do how to do it?
Sort of do. I mean, we do. You're going to want to edit this. No, we're a bit slutty. We start wherever they want us to start.
There's an honest moment.
That's a great answer.
The right place to start is.
But I can see how it would change in different organizations.
Right? It is, because everyone has slightly different needs. And
that's right.
And particularly when, there's a couple of different entry points. Decision making is a great place to really start talking about change management, because everyone understands what a decision is, and it doesn't sound so threatening compared to change. Yeah. But decisions are that is the product of, organizations are decision factories, Daniel Kahneman said. And that is so true. So looking at an organization as a decision factory, you can go in anywhere. You can go on the shop floor, you can go in the field, you can go on at the top. The thing that drives that is, where's the technology investment happening today? So that's the crossover. I think there's an interesting almost bifurcation that we're starting to see. And that's that some groups are very much in the almost sort of hill climbing. We want to do some little tweaks here. We want to just refine this. We want to adopt this. But it's essentially in the same kind of solution space that they exist in today. And it's a bit incremental, but it's refining a team's ability to make a judgment, refining a process. And then there's a different place that can happen at the strategic level, but actually isn't as much as you'd expect, which is that the entire solution space is completely different. It's that there's a whole landscape of different opportunities that AI can help people explore, different adjacent industries. It's what complexity people will refer to as the adjacent possible.
Sure.
That you can go into those places using data and AI in ways that you've never been able to before. And now you can with natural language. You don't have to actually have a machine learning model, because there's foundation models and the application layers are now built for that kind of query. Now, that's the most interesting place to be, because that's where people can make great leaps of creative judgment that they personally feel accountable for delivering on. And that's interesting, because that's so human to have that counterfactual thinking, to use imagination to take yourself out there. And then it's not that you sit there saying, well, there's a decision to go in that direction masquerading as a goal that we're going to deliver on. It's more entrepreneurial, because the what an entrepreneur or a true creative can do is sit down and map out that whole system and figure out how to nudge the system towards that goal. They can say, here's the incentive I want to put in place. Here's the recommendation that will nudge that. Here's how I'm going to think about self-organizing systems taking me in that direction. And that's why our most advanced offerings are around complexity, because that's very hard to do unless you have huge resources from a data and analytics perspective, because you really do need those high dimensional analytics to take you there. But if you don't have that, there's this wonderful thing called metaphor that actually humans are really adept at being able to see conceptually how a system works. Once they've got names for things like feedback and tipping points and hierarchies and nested systems, once they start having names for things and seeing that metaphors from one complex system can be applied to theirs, they can start getting really creative. And then what we've seen since we started working in complexity is you bolt on these large language models, and you don't have to use just your brain. You can get the large language model to overlay this complexity for you. You know, explain, give me examples of this idea, like, I don't know, a new pair of jeans, a new product line for jeans, as if I am in this market, or as if I'm doing it for this emerging demographic. And the language models can just put those things together in an instant.
Yeah.
And that doesn't give you the answer, but that gives you this creative boost.
I'll give you an example that I think might help in terms of history. So think about how we apply these sort of historical ideas to new scenarios, or we combine new ideas, right? So I was at Apple when we launched the stores.
Okay.
And that was everybody been to a store, right? Like, there was no question everybody been to a store. Most everybody had been to a store and bought a computer. But what happened was a reimagining of what that experience might be by applying different ideas, right? So the one that was most important in my world, because I was running software products that were related to media, was we created the theater, right? Because we knew that one of the experiences that people needed to have to truly understand how these products work, whether they were the big ones like Final Cut Pro or the simple ones like iTunes, was they actually had to experience it. So we allocated a big area of the store for a theater, and people would come and watch demos at night and have these experiences with the machines, something that was really never done in a computer store before, but combine these new ideas. That was revolutionary, right? And I'm going to come back to your question about how we approach the clients, because that was revolutionary, but it was something that could be done because the store team was brilliant and really inventive. But we were dealing with a known space, stores, people, retail, reps, etc. Like, that was understood. We're now dealing with the thing, we're trying to recreate businesses using this intelligence that we all really don't have a lot of experience with.
Right.
So what I'd be most worried about when you ask, like, do we go in at the strategic level or where do we start? I'm most worried about companies that aren't having the executive level experience of the tools. They think they understand what this thing is, but this isn't being a company like Apple walking into retail where everybody knows what a retail experience is like. They've all had that personal experience. So you could reimagine it because you're like, well, I've been in a store and I've had someone help me. And when the store re-changed around and you could actually check out on your hand, I mean, with the little devices, you don't have to go to the counter. That was revolutionary. But it was a step change, but it was something we could imagine because we'd experienced it. What I worry about is executives and companies who aren't experiencing these tools, these AI tools, and especially the generative AI tools themselves, because they won't have the individual personal experience to be able to guide the strategy in the right way.
Oh, and they don't have any sense of how incredibly powerful they are. It's, there's no way to think your way through this. You actually have to experience it yourself. And you have to get good at spending time. There is just no replacement for that. And the good news is it's really easy to do, and that there's huge benefits. I mean, just even talking to your kids about it is great.
It's a good starting point.
It's a good starting point. And I think what it does is it gives a level of insight and a level of motivation and drive to understand what these new skills are going to be. When we talk about automation now, how it's not really automation, that automation is kind of cleaved sort of forever from the idea of having these cognitive tools for us as humans, and gives you a sense for both the opportunity and the uncertainty.
Well, and the one thing that you guys were talking about in both of your examples when working with companies, and I think you've given me yet another sort of nugget of like, let's get back to the basics, right? Because you talked about complexity in systems and then giving people metaphors to kind of map it out and look at it themselves and be like, okay, wait, I get this. This looks like something I've seen before. And so it's like, let's not even talk about the AI yet or the tools that we're going to go about, automation. Like, let's talk about what are we automating? Like, let's actually talk about, because if you push those down to the lower layer, when I say those, being any sort of tool, any sort of AI tool that you're going to use to part of your task, but then you look at, well, what are we doing? It's a process. So when you talk about complexity, you talk about automation, every single one of those things touch on process, right? The movement of the things. And so until you actually understand that, map that out first and foremost, and then actually figure out, well, what is the role of the technology that puts into it? It gives you a grounding, because you're not now saying, here's this thing, I don't know what to do with it, right? Now you've got the combinatorial explosion problem the other way. I don't even know what to do or where to begin, as opposed to looking backwards and saying, what are we even doing now? What does it look like?
That's one of the reasons why doing some of these workshops with teams as a holistic group is so satisfying, because you can work through, all right, here's the principle. We're going to go back to like, here's how this intelligence works. Here's how you can use these. We go through use cases. And for us, it's generally conceptual use cases that we're putting into some sort of practice, right? So we're going to go explore the data cosmos, but here's the step-by-step to go through it. And then you see the people in the room going, oh, hey, we could use it for that.
Right.
Oh, hey, we could use that. Your project, right? Like,
right.
So you have the people in the room having that joint experience where they're figuring out how to apply it, and they're talking to each other, being like, wow, we could use that for this thing. And it was great. We did one with a technology group recently. And it was clearly one of the use cases that was most interesting was actually figuring out how to compare RFPs from large software vendors. And it was something that was critically important, and nobody liked doing it. Right? And they were like, oh boy, can we do this? We're like, yes, you can't put your RFPs in these systems yet. Once you have your own, domain, once you have your own data system, yes. But it's that communal experience where they figure out what to do with it. Yeah. And that's really satisfying.
That's an unlock.
Really energizing.
That's a huge unlock. And we sort of have 7 steps in this, and one of them is Fuse, where it's about, because synthesizing things as humans is hard, but that's a huge value. Summarizing is easy, synthesizing is hard, and you've got to synthesize step by step. There's a real art to it, because there's so many like micro judgments along the way that you're not even really conscious of. This process of synthesizing, of pulling out the meaning, the what matters, the why it matters, and then crafting the story around it, because in the end, people need a story in order to act. The numbers won't be enough. But that that fusing of the where the humans take that sort of core aspect of the meaning and then really kind of connect it up with what these models deliver as pure content. That's such an unlock for how fast that can happen, and the cycles of iteration just sort of speed up.
Is that also an unlock on trust, or is that going too far?
I hadn't thought about it that way, but
when they have that aha moment, I can
well,
do this, I can do that.
I mean, we sell aha moments, right? That's our stock and trade. And aha moments are incredibly powerful. I mean, they're neurologically distinct processes. Machines don't have them, and that's the moment where you have a new perspective on something that and it literally goes click. And they're so potent because that shift in perspective, that moment of insight, that gives you that phenomenological experience of clarity. We can be wrong, but that's our platform for action. And in the end, there's no point. There's no such thing as a decision where you do nothing.
That's a thing I now want to go quantify. And so that's really challenging to figure out because so much of technology prior has been, what is the output of the system, right? Is it an alert? Is it a PDF? Is it a financial spreadsheet? Is it, a prediction of what's going to happen in the supply chain? There's an output, and I can see, is that output valuable? This one, it's much more inside of our own workflow. And so the output is still ours, which is another key thing about thinking about these technologies. Like the thing makes a thing, and then you have to judge whether you want to pass that thing on to the rest of your team or up to your boss. Like that, yes, there are uses of generative technology that are going to be just automated. Like people want to use it for automated social media posting and those kinds of things, fine.
Right.
But a lot of it is stuff that's still going through our own judgment. So how do you?
Well, I mean, it's totally key. It's totally key. I mean, you look at the research here. Go back a couple of years. Look at how we measured the effectiveness of AI. It's all easy to measure. You could take a pre-AI workflow and then put the AI in it. Get predictive. The cost of prediction went down. The value of that prediction went up. The value of everything else in the chain went up. You've got this new business process. Now, look at the research. There are hardly any papers that are able to actually put sort of hard metrics on something because everything's been measured with human judgment. Measure rate the creative ideation of this group of consultants using GPT. Rate their ability to solve a problem, judged by other consultants. Rate your productivity using Copilot to help you write code. There's only a handful of studies that even measure that productivity based on the quality of the code and how long it took to write. Most are just asking people, do you feel more productive? So now I'm not saying that can't change. I think that it's such early days that we'll have better design studies. We'll truly understand what productivity that'll start to reveal itself, what productivity actually is. In marketing, is productivity having ChatGPT or some other marketing tool completely automate all of your social media posting so you're having more coffee, playing video games, doing more focus group work, talking to clients? What's happening with the rest of that time? We don't know really any of that now. So much of what we think about is the impact of these tools. One, it's still such early days, we just don't know. We can be fairly sure that big numbers will get smaller as studies get bigger and more robust. That's what happens across all of, that's what happens in science, what happens in medicine. When you see an effect, you go study it, it tends to get smaller. But I think the bit that really matters that we're under talking about, and there are people talking about this, DeepMind is probably the one who talks the most, is we could talk about productivity as being, I saved 10 minutes here and I did that a little bit faster. But that's actually not the game changer. The real game changer is deep creativity and big productivity, transformational change in the economy, entirely new materials, entirely new processes, entirely new jobs. None of that we can envisage because we're caught in this asymmetry. We can see what we might lose, but we don't know yet what we're going to gain. And one of the frustrating things to me in the discourse in AI is that we end up in this dystopia-utopia dichotomy, which is false. And the utopians spend a lot of time just sort of hand-waving about how life's going to be great when there's abundance, massive productivity, everything's going to be cheap, and people would say, well, we'll have the AIs mine lithium and then we'll suddenly have free everything. I can't follow this logic. It makes absolutely zero sense to me.
It's not you. It's not just you.
No, it's not. Yeah, I was wondering if there's something wrong with my brain, but
no, definitely not.
It just doesn't make. There's no one's really told a good story on this abundant, like post-scarcity economy is sort of what some people talk about it as. But what we really need is for some of these examples to actually come to pass. AlphaFold, we need a blockbuster, effective therapeutic in the market to prove that is as valuable in a systemic way as we think it might be conceptually. But it's a long way from finding a protein to having a therapeutic that's actually in the market that's saving people's lives. At the moment, that's a 10, 20-year pathway. Maybe we've compressed it a bit by having AI find that molecule. But I haven't heard yet how the system of creativity changes to be this large productivity gain. And I think for that, what you're really talking about is quite literal paradigm changes in the way that we conceptualize what a machine does versus what a human does and how you put them together. And you guys sort of you're early in you're early in this because you're taking what is sensory information that was previously only available to single humans and not just putting it into a system that single human can conceptualize it in a different way, but that the entire system of humans around them is conceptualizing it in a different way.
And I'm happy you were touching on a couple of different things there about sort of the future, right? And kind of this utopian version of abundance, right? And Dave and I always have these great conversations around that, right? Because Dave wears a shirt that says abundance on it, right? And we talk about that and of course we're doing more, we are more productive, we're creating more like health, like all those things are true. And then, we've talked like in times about like scarcity and constraints. We've talked about value, right? Like universal concepts that won't change in 100 years from now, things that are scarce are more valuable for a reason. That doesn't necessarily give them inherent value, but those are the types of things that won't change. And so when you're talking about kind of the ways that we think about technology interacting with the real world, we as a company sit there and go, what won't change? What's future-proof, right? And so we're dealing with things like physical materials. You will always need to get energy, food, those types. That's not going away. AI is not going to change. So you start to it's still, we haven't solved all of those problems. Those problems of if we have more people, we didn't change the fact that there's still only a fixed amount of resources on this planet. AI is not changing that. And so we've got to I think this kind of goes back to your sort of your in the future type thing. What are we doing? We don't just give up and all start just painting all day long, right?
Oh no, I think that's. I think that's an absurd vision, and one of the reasons it's absurd is it just completely neglects one of these things that when we say what is universal, what's not going to change.
Right.
The more we know, the more we can know, and the more we want to know. And there's a famous law in complexity, which is something along the lines of, take a meter rule or a yard rule and try and measure the borders of a country, take the UK or something. And you now make that half a meter, now make that 10 centimeters, now make that 1 centimeter, now make that 1 millimeter. That complexity, it's like a fractal. It gets more and more, and you see more and more. You never get to the end of it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening with our knowledge. You could make GPT-5, GPT-6, GPT-7 and have more words, more images, more audio. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get more general intelligence. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get anything. We don't know. We're just going to be able to see more and more of the smaller and smaller. And so I think we'll see. And what else do we know? Biology is always more complex than we think it's going to be. And that includes all of our ecosystems and all of the problems. When we networked our opportunities, we networked our problems. And so how do we use AI to help us break these intractable, connected, robust problems into smaller pieces that we can grapple with as humans?